right, so that started up. Hold on, give me one more second. I just want to plug in my computer before I don't want it to turn off at an inopportune time. You can hear me, right, Maria?
Yes.
All right, so here we go. Let me pull this up. Just give me one second. I'm just pulling everything up. All right, so we are 2 seconds away. So this is for everyone out there. This is just going to be a review of what we did earlier. Um, Again, hopefully this will be a cleaner version. And here's myself and Maria, and I am going to be going over the PowerPoint for the review of public institutions. So if you guys give me a quick second, I'm just pulling up the slides, and we're going to be heading into it right now. All right, Maria, can you see my screen?
No, I just see your picture. Oh, now I see it. Now I see it.
All right. So here we go. So welcome, and let me start the presentation. Okay, let me close this out. So, all right. So this is going to be about the final exam, the sample final exam that was put on for PI, and we want to go over it just to see how the professor generally test, and I'm going to give you some tips on what to look for the exam. So my first thing is about time. Time. Now, I'm not sure about most students, especially for law school exams, have the issue with time. Sometimes at the end of the class, you'll see them typing their life away. I was one of those students who, time was a factor for me. So if it's a factor for you, this 7 to 10 minutes is but on average on what it took to read the sample final exam. And for everyone out there, the sample final exam is actually up on Twin. In the PI Twin page, and it's literally labeled sample final exam. So in class, I actually timed how long it took for everyone to read the exam. It took us between 7 to 10 minutes to read the exam. Now, just imagine doing that twice. And most students actually read the exam twice, which will take about 20 minutes. And this is before you type anything. This is just reading the exam. And the reason why is because students generally will read the fact pattern the first time, which takes 7 to 10 minutes. Then they'll read the call of the question, which maybe take a minute or two, and then they'll reread the entire question again to try to mirror it with the call of the question. So what I would say do is don't read the question first, but goes directly to the call of the question. This is an illustration of just how some of my exams actually looked. But this is actually just a markup from something online. But I use it to show is that generally when I read through the essay portion the first time, I make a lot of notes. Like I'll be circling keywords and things that I think are important. And then if I go to the call of the question and it's not and the things that are not related to that, my page is like all messed up because I've made all these markings that don't really need to be made. So to avoid that, I would say read the call of the question first. And it's going to take you about it's going to save you a lot of time because it not only in reading the call of the question will let you know what you're looking for in the fact pattern, allowing you to use the first read through of the facts to be active, in which you're knowing what you're reading and you'll be looking for certain things. And what this presentation is going to do is first identify or help you identify exactly how to do this effectively for PI. So are you still with me, Maria?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so let's get into it. So what we're going to do is going to read the call of the question, and then we're going to go through it. So this is the call of the question for the sample exam that's up. And it says, assuming the applicable standards, I'm getting tongue tied now. Assuming the applicable standing and timing requirements are satisfied, what scope and standard of review apply, and how is the court likely to decide the plaintiff's claim? And then we have three sub questions: A, B, C, and D. So A is the Department of Education's interpretation of Title IX and its regulations requiring that males and female participants in athletics be substantially proportionate to their respective enrollments. And they're saying that this is contrary to the statute and thus invalid. The second question is the department's interpretation of its regulation that require educational institutions to reduce or eliminate available athletic programs for one sex to achieve proportionality is invalid. And the last piece is Navarro University's decision to eliminate the male wrestling program is unreasonable. So these are the three questions that have been presented to us before we've read the fact pattern. So how is this helpful? How is reading this helpful? Well, there's some keywords here that we have to recognize. And the first one is scope and standard of review. When you're talking about scope and standard of review, the professors pointed us to four particular things that we have to look for: either Chevron analysis, an hour analysis, Mead-Skidmore, or arbitrary and capricious. So, in understanding that, scope and standard of review are leading us to four doctrines that we may have to apply. The second keyword that we want to look at for is the word interpretations. Now, we saw that in two of the questions. Now, what are we interpreting? Well, we're either going to be interpreting a governing statute, or we're going to be interpreting a regulation. Based on what we're interpreting helps drive us to figure out what doctrine we're going to use in interpretation. So first, let's start with the governing statute. If we're interpreting the governing statute, we can do it one of two ways. We can do it through a regulation or a rule, and that carries the force of law. You know it as legislative rules and so forth. We can also do it a separate way through a policy or guidance document. And in doing it through a policy or guidance document, we can interpret the governing statute of either one or two of those ways. So Maria, are you good with me already? Interpreting the governing statute in one or two ways: regulation or a policy statement.
Yes.
Okay. So now, if the scope and standard review is an interpretation of the governing statute through a regulation or rule, then we're going to apply Chevron deference. Interpreting the governing statute through a regulation or rule or something that carries the force of law. But if we're interpreting the governing statute through a policy, something that doesn't carry the force of law, then you're going to look to a Mead-Skidmore analysis, which the court is going to use as a scope and standard review in that interpretation. So at this point, do you understand the first half of this chart, Maria?
Sorry. Yes.
No. I just want to make sure you're still good, because I know you said you were new to the whole Google Hangout thing. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
So all right. So the first part, we're good with interpreting the governing statute. There are one or two outcomes. If you're interpreting it through a rule or something that carries the force of law, Chevron analysis. If you're interpreting it through a policy statement or something that doesn't carry the force of law, you're applying a Mead-Skidmore. So, but now what about regulations? Well, if the agency is interpretations of its own regulations, then our next question is that regulation, is it parroting the governing statute? Is it just a parrot? Is it just saying the same thing as the governing statute does? And remember, the outcome was different. If that's a no, if the answer to that question is no, then it would receive our deference. But if the answer to that question is yes, then it would receive Mead Skidmore analysis. Remember, this is an agency interpreting its own regulation, and if it doesn't parrot the regulation, then you're using one of these two methods. No, our, yes, you're going to a Mead Skidmore analysis. Now, the second piece to scope and standard of review is fact finding, choices, and decisions. So if we're challenging an agency's decisions that they've made or findings of fact, we're generally doing that through arbitrary and capricious. The factors that are listed within, I forget, I think it's 706 or something like that of the APA, but we're challenging it under arbitrary and capricious. We're saying that these decisions or these facts that they found were done, or these choices that the agency made were done in a way that's arbitrary and capricious. So that's what, when we're looking at scope and standard of review, this chart is what we're really looking at. And again, I just want to make sure it's very clear that this chart I derived from the sample grading rubric for this exam. So Maria, are you with me? Are you still with me?
Yes.
Do you have any questions at this point?
Nope.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. So now let's go into the back to the call of the question. So the first question, the first keyword that we see is obviously scope and standards of review in the first and at the top of the page. So that's going to trigger our first understanding. Okay, we're looking for one of four things: Mead Skidmore, Chevron, or we're looking at arbitrary and capricious for this particular exam. Now, question A says very specifically the Department of Education's interpretation of Title IX and its regulations. So, Maria, I want to ask you. Are you here?
Yes.
All right. So now, look at this. It says here, the Department of Education interpretation of Title IX and its regulations. So we're not going to read past that. We're just going to stop there. So now, if you look at this next slide, the first word we see is interpretations, right?
Correct.
Interpretations. The next thing, is it an interpretation of Title IX? Is that a governing statute or a regulation?
A governing regulation.
Title IX isn't a regulation; it's a governing statute.
Oh, okay. But when you say governing statute, do you mean like a government versus the agency itself?
Like the enabling statute, like the Food and Drug Administration statute.
Got it.
So that's what I'm talking about. So Title IX is a governing statute.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if Title IX, the governing statute, since Title IX is a governing statute, there's only two ways we can interpret it: either through a rule, regulation, or through a policy. Correct?
Correct.
So which way is this question leading us to say that it's being interpreted through?
A regulation.
So since it's being interpreted through a regulation, what law are we going to apply? What scope and standard of review are we going to apply? And so you see how this chart identifies what scope and standard of review we're going to apply to question A.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we'll do the same for question B. Question B is 1B is interpretation of its regulate the Department of Education's interpretation of its regulations to require. So here we have the word interpretation again. And now we're talking about the rule, it says of its regulation. So we're talking about an interpretation of a regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So now the next question is the regulation, does it parrot the governing statute? And this one, since it seems like it does not, we'll say no. And then we're looking at our deference.
Okay.
But if that was yes, then we'd be looking at Mead Skidmore.
Mm-hmm. So just to be clear, where it says it's governing statute, we have to because I want to be clear that it's not policy, that I don't confuse it with like their personal policy. The agency policy. So what would I look at? The word statute?
Repeat that question one more time.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I can hear you fine.
So I just want to make sure that I don't confuse um its governing statute, like the policy guidance. Like I would look for the word statute, right, to make sure that it's a regulation as opposed, because I think my initial reaction would have been to think of it as its policy. So like to how do I differentiate between its policy and its regulations?
Well, here it clearly says the Department of Education's interpretation of its regulation.
Okay,
You
okay,
see that of its regulation?
okay,
So, so,
yes.
so it clearly says regulation. And even going back, even in the first one, it says interpretation of Title IX. Now, when we read the fact pattern, you'll see Title IX is a statute, is enabling statute, is a statute that gives the agency the authority. So that's why we know this one is a governing statute. And then for the regulation, it just says interpretation of its regulation. So that's what leads us to this piece where it says
Okay,
rules and
so
regulations.
do me a favor, scooch back to the previous slide.
Sure.
Okay. So you see in the 1A where it says interpretation of Title 9 in its regulations.
Correct.
Right. So that kind of confuses me because Title 9 is not its regulation, it's part of the governing statute.
So let's go back. So interpretation of Title IX. Now we're saying three things we're looking at here. You're seeing the word interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
Title IX, which is a statute,
Right.
and they're interpreting that statute where?
In its regulations.
So let's look now. So you have the interpretation
Mm-hmm.
of Title IX, which is the governing statute,
Correct.
and either now you can do it in one of two ways. You can do it through a guidance document or policy or through a regulation. How are they interpreting the governing statute?
Through its regulations.
And that is why you have here. Now that's why they're marked in red here, because you see how in one where it's first you evaluate the governing statute, then it turns into regulation. But in the other piece, it goes regulation first, and then you make an evaluation of the governing statute. So it reverses itself a little bit, and that's why I have that little purple dotted line to show that there's a relationship there, but
Oh,
just not to get confused.
okay.
Did that answer your question?
I think it'll become clearer as we keep talking, but I'm a little so like the both read are the same exact thing.
Yeah, both of these are regulations, but this is the first level is what you're interpreting. If you're
Mm,
interpreting the governing statute, you can do it in one of two ways. You can interpret it through a regulation, but the second one is we're interpreting the actual regulation. So we're interpreting a regulation,
okay.
and that's the difference.
Okay.
So now, for the third question, it says Navarro University's decision to eliminate the male wrestling program was unreasonable. Well, if we look at that, you'll see one thing we'll see is that that is a decision. And when you're talking about you're challenging their decisions, we're saying that they're arbitrary and capricious, that they made this decision and we believe they made it for bad reasons. That's what we're talking about. That's what that question is leading you to. Now, again, this is from the rubric that was put on. So when we see
Right.
things like fact finding, choices, decisions, you should be thinking about arbitrary and capricious in the guise of scope and standard of review.
Okay.
So, so this chart is really the understanding of the first question, understanding that there are keywords that you want to look for. And those keywords are interpretation. Well, the first keyword you want to look for is scope and standard of review, right? When you see scope and standard of review, it narrows your understanding and saying, okay, we're just looking for these maybe 4 to 5 particular topics. When you get from scope and standard of review, now you're looking for the word of interpretation. Because what are you interpreting? If you're interpreting the governing statute, how are you interpreting the governing statute? Through a regulation. And the same thing is if you're interpreting a regulation, then how are you interpreting that regulation? And does that regulation parrot the governing statute? And based on the answers in this flowchart, it should lead you to exactly what doctrine you need to apply for either one of these questions. Now, in this kid, question A and question A is Chevron, question B is hour, and question C would be arbitrary and capricious. Any questions?
Nope. Now, oh, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
So, do we even mention meet Skidmore as a raise and resolve or no?
You should mention Reed Skidmore, and we'll see that in a second because I'll show you the professor's. I put an outline of the professor's grading rubric, and
Okay.
you'll see even though Mead Skidmore is not made an analysis, it is mentioned um, in the grading rubric, and so I think you should mention it within the
Okay.
grading rubric in this particular way. You would say, for instance, in interpretation of the governing statute, generally you can use either Chevron analysis and Mead Skidmore. Then you explain the difference and explain why you're using Chevron instead of Mead Skidmore. Here, Chevron analysis is appropriate because they're interpreting the governing statute through a rule, which through a legislative rule which carries the force of law. Whereas if they were interpreting the governing statute through a policy or guidance document, then you would apply Mead Skidmore.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. So the next piece of it is I want to talk about due process.
Oh, I lost the screen.
I know it's turned white, right?
Oh, black. I thought it was me. I'm sorry.
Oh, so now we're here at Mead Skidmore. I'm not Mead Skidmore. I want to take a turn to due process real quick because for due process, there's a piece here that a lot of students have come to me and just have been a little confused about the due process piece. So I want to go over the due process piece really quickly, and then we'll see how it applies to the test at bar.
Okay.
So there are three ways we can get due process: through the Constitution, which sets the floor; statutes, where you can have it in the statute. Well, this is due process, or you can have a rule that tells you what process you're owed. Right? You can have any one of these three that give you certain forms of due process. Understanding that the Constitution sets a floor, but you can gain more through these other processes. Right?
Right.
So here, generally with due process, there's a three-step analysis, and we're going to go through that three-step analysis. So step one, do you have a right to due process at all? Well, you'll see this question about being entitled to a hearing, and that's really asking you, are you entitled to due process at all? Or if you're entitled to a hearing or anything more than that. So what we'll say that is that if you're entitled to due process, you need to have three criteria set. One, do you have state action? Right? That's fundamental, correct?
Right.
You also need to have an individualized grievance. It can't be generalized. It has to be individualized grievance. And the third piece you need is a life, liberty, or property interest implicated. So if you have all three of these, then you are entitled to some due process. Would you agree?
Yes.
But now the question would be, what process is due? So a lot of students, what they would assume is that the person, we're now using the Matthews balancing test to determine what process is due. But fundamentally, after you check all three of these boxes, and this is a question to you, Maria, what process do you think? What is the person entitled to if they have state action, individualized grievance, and their life or liberty process, or the life, liberty, or property interest implicated? If they check all three of those boxes, what do they have?
Notice and comment.
They would have a notice and opportunity to be heard,
Mm-hmm.
which is the lowest level of due process. That's the floor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So remember, they all due process because they have those three. So they would have notice and opportunity to be heard, but they could have more. And the way we determine if they're going to get more is through the Matthews balancing test. So we've checked all three of our boxes, and now we move to step two. What process do you get? Well, we know you got notice and opportunity to be heard, but we want to see if you have more. So you do the Matthews balancing test. The governmental interest and the cost of providing additional safeguards versus the value of an accurate finding with additional procedures, plus the nature of the private interest at stake. And remember, this could be for P, you could have a statute that gives you this right. Remember, I think it was Goldberg v. Kelly, where there was a statute that gave that gave the welfare recipient this right. It was a state created statute that gave them this entitlement. So that was the nature of the private interest. And also, let's not forget, it was substance. It was the fact that this person, if they don't get these benefits, could starve. This was very important to them. So the private interest was very, very strong in that case. So after step two, then we move to step three. Now, in step three, we're making an evaluation. If the cost of governmental procedures is extremely high and PV are low, what do you get at this point, Maria?
Um, you don't get a hearing.
What process do you get though? What due process do you get, if any?
I'm not sure.
Well, remember earlier you said that when you checked all three of these boxes, you got notice and opportunity to be heard.
Right.
So you've checked all three of these boxes, but it's come out that C is higher than the cost is to the government extremely high and the P and V extremely low. So what process do you think would be due at that point?
I don't know. Oh, just the regular the lowest level.
There it is, notice and opportunity to be heard.
Okay.
Because you get some form of due process because you check those three
Oh,
boxes.
got you. Okay.
So you're getting notice and opportunity to be heard. But now let's say if the reverse happens, then you can get the trial like in Goldberg v. Kelly, right?
Right.
And remember, very important to remember, this is a spectrum. So the lowest is notice and opportunity to be heard. The highest is a trial, but you can get gradations in between. You can get something in the middle. You can get something a little heavier than notice and opportunity to be heard. You can get something lighter than a trial. It
So
really all depends.
a face-to-face hearing would be considered notice and opportunity.
Well, I'm not really sure because I would say notice and opportunity to be heard would be, they send you notice that they're about to do something, maybe a letter, and
And
you're
then
able to
you get to
respond, and you're able to respond in some way. You're able to either send a letter yourself, or even at these public hearings, that's they give you notice that they're going to have a hearing, and then you have an opportunity to go and speak your mind at the
got it.
public hearing. So, notice and opportunity to be heard could be in many different facets, but that's generally the lowest level of due process that you get.
Okay.
So the last piece of this, remember, just because you have this trial, it's the Matthews balancing test is not the only way you can achieve a trial like process. Don't forget the organic statute, or I shouldn't have put organic statute. Yeah, the governing statute could say you should get an on the record hearing, and if it says that, then obviously you're going to get a trial too, right?
Mm-hmm.
No matter what the balancing test says. Or if the agency in its own rules says that you get a trial like Goldberg or Kelly, on the record here, full on the record hearing, that would also get you a trial, correct? So there are other ways to get the full trial other than the Matthews balancing test. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the first way is either through the governing or organic statute, and the second way is through a rule promulgated through notice and comment rulemaking or through adjudication. But there are multiple ways to get the trial like process. And the last piece of it is that it's not linear. It's not either or. There are gradients because you could have a statute that gives you notice and comment and maybe an appeal process or something like that, which would be a little bit more than just plain notice and comment. So if you do a Matthews balancing test and lose that test, you wouldn't just get notice and opportunity to be heard. You would get what you had before, or the bare minimum that the either statute or the rule put forward. I hope I didn't confuse you with that.
No, that's fine.
All right. So this was the first part of understanding the how the exam is broken down and understanding the triggers of answering the particular questions. So do you have any questions with the first part?
No.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
All right. You're making it easier for me. Hold on one second. I let me pull up this the second piece to it right now. I feel so bad. It's like it's funny because I had this thing up and then I closed it by accident, and now I gotta go search for it again. Here it is. No, it's not it. I don't know. It's so funny because usually when I'm here, I always like I'll open a document
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll close it so fast that I'll forget. I'm like, oh my god, why did I close this? Because I'm so used to closing on
Mm.
my.
Can you look at the history? Maybe it comes up.
No, I have it. I'm just pulling.
Um,
It's just pulling it up on my screen so we can all see it. Okay, let me present right now again. Okay, all right. So we're back in action. Okay, so this is the PI Spring 2018 final sample final exam. Now, this is from the professor's bare bones rubric, but I changed it into more of an outline format.
okay.
So, if when we look at it, you'll see the first question, scope and standard of review. What I've done is that here I've broken it down so it's now in an outline format. So this is going to exactly what the professor's looking for. And you'll see point allocations sometimes next to them to tell you how, if it's 1 point, 2 points. Is this too small? Can you see this?
It is small now. I can see it better. But you
Okay.
have did you upload it to Twin?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
You know what? Let me do this. Let me download it and open it up in a different browser so you can see it. This is very small.
I looked at it before from Twin, but I didn't know if it's the same version.
Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah, it's the same version. All right, hold on. I have another version of it now. I don't want you squeezing your eyes too much. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's hard for me to see it. All right, can you see that now?
Yes.
All right. So at the top, it's just the initial question that we were looking at before, and now I've broken it down to an actual. I've broken it down to an outline format. Now, if you look, here's the rule that she's given us, and one thing I do like about this is she's told us exactly what she's looking for. So, give a brief overview of the scope and standard of judicial review for agency action. So, she says briefly summarize. And this is what you were talking about before. Do we need to talk about Mead Skidmore? But she puts here, yes, Chevron Mead Skidmore deference for agency interpretations. She wants to tell her what our deference is, and she wants us to tell you about arbitrary and capricious. So, even in her grading rubric, she mentions the big four that we were just talking about and says that she wants you to mention them. And then she even gives you a short way to make it to apply it. So it's just like in evidence. She's given us exactly what she's looking for and the type of application she's looking for. And this should if you have this type of question on the exam, you should just be replicating this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And here, now let's go to Chevron deference for question one. For Chevron deference, it says, and I'll expand it a little bit. It says, is the agency's interpretation articulated through a legislative or adjudicative order, or through an informal guidance document? Now, what's the difference between a legislative rule or an adjudicative order and an informal guidance document?
The informal guidance document is more like Their manual, their internal manual, and then a legislative rule would be like the notice and comment where people have given feedback and had an opportunity to be heard.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question. This question:
Oh, sorry.
Which one, which one of these three, the legislative rule, adjudicative order, and informal guidance, which one carry the force of law?
Legislative rule,
And
because
what
that
about
applies to everybody, right?
and what about adjudicative orders?
Huh?
Adjudicative orders, do they carry any force?
Only for one person, no?
But
Isn't
they
it?
but they carry the force of law, right? They can be enforced.
They can, yeah.
So those carry the force of law. Now, what about an informal guidance document?
That's the policy, like a policy manual. That's just an internal um set of rules,
So they don't carry the force of law, right?
right?
So now look at the next line. It says this will determine whether Chevron slash Meade Skidmore deference applies.
Mm-hmm.
Now remember earlier when now remember earlier. Let me see if I can bring this up again.
I remember you had the two sides.
Hmm.
I remember you had the two sides with the chart going down.
Yeah. Now that's when I'm going to bring it up right now. So I want you to remember earlier. We're going to go back to the chart real quick. Now remember with this chart, this is the same thing. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
governing statute, whether it's a regulation, legislative rule, or you could actually put adjudicative order there too, or a
That was my
policy
question. Where
document.
would I put that under?
Huh?
That was going to be my question. Where would adjudicative orders go under? The red one, the
They would go under
regulation.
red because they would carry the force of law.
Okay, got you.
And then you see how they lean to Chevron versus if you're talking about the policy document, you're talking about Meade Skidmore.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the difference in that?
Yes, but then on the right hand side, on the regulations, you only have hour or mid meet Skidmore.
Okay. So what else should I have?
No, I'm asking why isn't Chevron there? Although it's on the
Because
left
remember,
hand.
Chevron is when you're remember Chevron applies when you're interpreting what?
A legislative, the rules with the force of law.
No, but what do you have to be for Chevron to apply? You have to be interpreting the governing statute, remember?
Got you. Okay.
But for our, you have to be interpreting what? A regulation.
Okay.
So let me go back. This one. So that question, this will determine Chevron or Meade Skidmore deference. That's exactly what that chart was showing. That's why I think the chart is powerful because if you follow the chart, it'll show exactly where you need to go and show you where you need to do your understanding. Let me
Okay.
go for Chevron step 0. It's the rule, how to apply it, and then her point allocations for both. You'll see step 1, the same thing, the rule, the application. Chevron step 2, rule application. And you see the factors determining whether it's reasonable or not. You see the factors laid out there, and then the determination of points. So again, this it's comprehensive in the sense where we've taken the professor's rubric and broken it down so now you can just easily go to the outline, this outline of the rubric, and understand if this particular question comes up, this is what the professor is going to be looking for, and this is the points that she's allocating to it. Even to the point where we go to the due process analysis. When we go to the due process analysis, you can see just for stating the conclusion, she's giving you a point. You have due process, which is 10 points, state action, individualized. So when you go for step 1, the threshold issue, like we were talking before, do you have state action? Is it an individualized grievance? And whether life, liberty, or property interests are implicated, and what that means. Then when you go to step 2, it tells you exactly the same thing, how to apply the Matthews balancing test, And then it also, remember at the end when I said there are other ways to get full trials other than Matthew's balancing test. Here
Mhm.
she talks about the organic statute that clearly calls for a hearing on a record, and if the statute is ambiguous, how the court would apply Chevron deference. But that's something that we're going to learn next week. So I want to let the professor introduce that first before we talk about that. But
Okay.
so you see how using this outline, you can start going and understanding what the professor is looking for with the response.
Yes.
And the last piece I just want to mention is that you should use this outline with also there's also the sample out the sample outline on twin on my twin page, the skills twin page, which let's say for instance if you're looking for cases for Chevron.
Mhm.
Let me bring that up now. I just thought about this, and I think this is actually going to be good because what it's going to do. Okay, so you can see my entire screen now, right?
Mhm.
So now, do you see this right here? How this is the PI fund on the rubrics. This is on the twin page. But you see
Mhm.
where it says skeleton outline public institutions?
Sure.
If you click on that, it's going to bring you to the skeleton outline for the course. And we were talking about administrative agencies and deference. Like sometimes, a couple of students were asking me earlier, what are the cases that revolve around this particular point? What are the cases that revolve around this point? Well, here it is right here. It literally, you're going to have to maybe go and look up the cases, but Vermont Yankee, deference and judicial review. We learned that on 2-6. And here are the cases Chevron, Auer, Christopher Smith, Klein. And here's Christensen, here's Skidmore, here's Decker, here's Mead. So again, this if you match up your understanding with this outline, when you get to Auer, you go to the Auer class and say, okay, this is what these are the cases that stood for Auer. You go to the Chevron portion. This is what Chevron is saying. Here's Mead Skidmore. Here are the cases that developed this court. So if you use these in conjunction, even if you don't know, you're not familiar with the cases now, you could familiarize yourself with the cases at a later time because they're all here. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So with that said, that is really the end of my presentation. I feel bad. It was like it's
Why are you feeling bad?
because I feel like I need to say more, but I don't know. There's nothing else to say because we kind of went through it all.
Okay.
So do you have any
So
questions?
not at the moment, but if I do, because I'm gonna try and do my own practice answer, and I'll have her review it, and if I have any questions or as I review stuff, if anything comes up, I'll reach out to you.
Definitely. And I would say this: if you're going to do the sample answer,
Yeah.
look at both the chart and the sample in the outline grading rubric online, and it should help you navigate. Because again, if her final exam is going to be very similar to this,
Mhm.
you know what you're looking for. When you hear scope and standard of review,
Mhm.
you should know, okay, there's only, she can't really fool me. There's only certain things that she can ask me about. She says
Mhm.
if you see interpretations, then you know, okay, I'm looking, what are we interpreting and how are we interpreting it? We're interpreting a governing statute. If it's through a rule, Chevron. If it's through a policy, meet Skidmore. If we're interpreting a regulation, okay, we're looking either at Auer to meet Skidmore. Because again, when you're going and trying to read through the fact pattern, it's difficult. It takes 10 minutes. And if
Right.
you can narrow that to only do it once, then that's going to save you time and make your answer more powerful because now you'll be reading through the examples with purpose instead of just reading it and trying to shoot.
Right. Yeah. That in itself saves a lot of time. Now I have a question
Sure.
about property. Did you get a chance to do the video about the review of the midterm?
Yes, I'm actually going to be doing that. I'm
On
thinking
Wednesday?
either to. Well, I'm going to be. I want to do it in class on Wednesday, but I'm going to try to see if I can pump out a video tomorrow or maybe Tuesday. But we'll see because I was. Excuse me. I want to speak to the professor about a couple of things on there. So as soon as we get that out,
Okay.
I'll let you know. But it'll be coming up really soon. It's not gonna. I'm not gonna let that sit for too long.
All righty. And then Wednesday we're gonna do property, you said?
Yeah, Wednesday I want to touch on property and start touching
Okay.
on some of the because it seems right now, from my understanding, a lot of people were confused about PI. So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to go do this like comprehensive review of PI, so
Yeah.
people just understand how it all flows together. And I'm hoping like even after this, you have a better understanding of how everything flows together, and
Mm-hmm.
then we'll start practicing just writing out the exam because it's kind of similar to evidence in which the professor's already given you what she wants. It's just
Right.
you being able to replicate it if new fact patterns are presented to you.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That
All
sounds
right,
good.
all right, Maria. I hope this was helpful, and I'm
Very much so. Don't feel bad. I think you did a great job.
and hopefully other students will probably be looking at this and hopefully learning from my mistakes probably, and hopefully it'll be nice and smooth. So listen, I'm going to thank you again, and I thought this was great, and I will be seeing you tomorrow.
Yeah. I'll see you tomorrow, and then we'll see. Well, tomorrow through Wednesday, but then Wednesday we'll do the skill session.
Now, do you mind if I keep this recording up so everybody else can see it? I just want to make sure because it was just me and you. That's why.
No, that's fine. I mean, I didn't know the answers to some of the questions, but it's
No, but
fine.
that's good because not everybody's going to know the answer to the questions, and the same questions that you have, a lot of people out there have those same questions. So it's
Okay.
actually good because it just shows. But but sometimes people, if you're having any hesitation, let me know and I
No,
can
no,
take
no.
this
I'm
off.
fine. It's
All right,
fine.
you'll be the star of this YouTube video.
I'll add that to my resume.
Well, listen, you take care, and I will see you tomorrow.
Okay. See you mañana. Thank you so much.
No problem. Take care.
Okay. Bye bye.